very happy that you're all here and answering your fundraising questions. But before we start, can everyone hear and see me? And please let me know via the chat on the right corner. I haven't seen any responses yet. Are you able?
People are typing, so yes.
Perfect.
That's a good sign. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Good. Perfect. So we can start.
Ali.
Well, my name is Merel Kijkendevechten and I'm a consultant at HVFC. I mainly work on monitoring and evaluation, but also support fundraising assignments. I lived abroad for a few years before coming back to the Netherlands at the beginning of this year, where I started to work for this company. We'll be hosting this webinar and I'll interview Han Valk on your Q&A questions. Before we start, some practical issues. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the chat. And we will probably, hopefully, all answer your questions directly today. This webinar will also become available on our YouTube channel, so please don't hesitate to like and share it. Other coming free introduction webinars will also come up, such as making the right decision, negotiating with partners and donors, and on impact. So please follow up if you want to see any more of our webinars soon. Now, first I will give the floor to Han. Han, could you please introduce yourself a little and tell us about HVFC?
Yes, thank you, Merel. So, hi everyone. My name is Han. I am the founder of HVFC, a consultancy company that accelerates the performance of organizations we believe in. That's our slogan, and that means we help organizations in their fundraising efforts to make sure that the fundraising efforts go faster and more efficient. We help them on monitoring and evaluation, like Merel already mentioned, so help organizations to measure their impact and to evaluate their performance. And we help organizations with finding the right staff members to fit their team to be more successful. So we also do recruitment. We work from two offices. So one is in Gouda, where I'm currently at, the cheese capital of the world, in the Netherlands. And we also have an office in Washington, D.C. in the US. But we work in some 25 countries for almost 100 non-profits, I would say. So we work quite globally. Just a little bit about myself. I am a fundraiser by profession. I've worked for 3 international NGOs as head of fundraising before I started this company, just a little less than 5 years ago. And currently we are with a team of 15 people. You see a few of them here on the picture, from 12 nationalities. So I'm extremely proud of that. And all of them great people that have worked for NGOs, but most of us also for donor agencies as well. So we bring in both worlds. And today we're going to talk about a few questions that you have asked over the last week or 2 weeks actually. So I'm very excited, and don't hesitate to ask any questions in between. You're muted, Merel. I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
So let's start with the questions. Yeah. We already received a few beforehand, so we will start with those. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. So here's the first one. That received the following message from a foundation we apply to. Due to COVID-19, we postpone the granting decision until further notice. What to do? So Han, what to do?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, and I think this organization is not the only organization that got this message over the last weeks, and maybe also in the coming months this will grow a lot. what we see with especially foundations, I think I mentioned 2 weeks ago in another Q&A session that we did not see a trend yet that foundations are moving their funding from their operations to COVID-19 funding, but actually we're increasing their funding. But over the last 2 weeks, there have also been a few foundations that decided to reallocate some of their funding completely to COVID-19. Like, for example, the Bill Gates Foundation, they announced that they are going to move more or less all of their funding from malaria, TB, and HIV related activities to COVID-19. We have to see how that works in practice, but that of course is quite serious. So it is important before you decide what to do to explore where your foundation is, where this foundation is coming from. So is this a foundation that is moving completely, like the Gates Foundation, from funding activities like yours to COVID-19, or are there other reasons why they have to postpone this granting decision? So my first thing would be to figure out, where this organization is coming from. Might also be that there are some very practical reasons why they cannot make this granting decision at this moment. So if, for example, in the bylaws of this foundation, it says that the board needs to meet physically to make a decision, and due to COVID-19, it's not possible, there's a very practical reason why this granting decision is postponed. So if that is the situation, you just wait, you reply to the foundation that you understand where they come from, and you just use the time until they make a decision to build on the relationship. It is important to ask them if they can give a little bit of an indication on what further notice means. That's so broad that it's we need to have a little bit of an idea. Are we talking about a few weeks or months or maybe half a year or longer? So that's something you can just ask. And you can also ask why they made this decision, and that helps you to decide what to do. It is, of course, possible that they temporarily postpone this and are going to reconsider all their applications they've received again in, let's say, half a year or so. If that happens, even if they say, don't worry, we are going to evaluate your proposal as if it was yesterday, I would not take that for granted, because a lot can happen in the coming months. So I would not just sit there back and relax and wait until they come back to us. No, I would put quite a lot of energy and keep on explaining to the foundation how important it is that you get your funding. And especially if you need funding urgently, it is good to explain that to the foundation as well. And I hope this organization has a good relationship with this foundation, so they have the right, they are in a good position to explain why it's so important that they get already funding sooner maybe than the foundation was insisting or willing to do. Because it is possible to, even when you get this statement, to negotiate a outcome where you get your funding sooner. If this organization is moving all of its resources to COVID-19, I think even if they say we are still going to evaluate your proposal soon, I think in your planning and your financial budgeting of your organization, good to maybe put this one very low on the expected success rate, because it's very likely that you won't get any funding from them. So it depends a little bit on where you come from, but there are still opportunities, and make sure there's clear communication between you and the foundation. That's the key thing to start with.
Yeah, it's good to see that. I guess COVID-19 is affecting all of us at the moment, and it's important also to keep contact with the funding organization, but also to keep your eyes open for other possibilities. That's very helpful, Han. Thank you. Our next question will be, what is the best strategy to approach a new donor?
Yeah. So this is something you might recognize if you are expanding your donor base. We see organizations that are going from their home country to other countries, for example, from Europe to try to enter the US market, or the other way around. Or so what is important to know is that these donors probably don't know you so well. And that means you really have to work on your reputation and on the relationship. So my advice, not knowing the context of your specific organization, is to first invest in the relationship with the specific donor before talking about money and about your project. So it's important to know what their needs are and what the objectives of these foundations are. And that can be, or also institutional donors or individuals, it's the same thing. But it can be that the real objectives of these organizations are not exactly the same as you see on the website. And that's sometimes something you might not consider. So organizations that come to us sometimes only look at the strategic plans of a funder, for example, and say there is a good match because we've seen it on the website. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that is actually happening. For example, if a foundation is reconsidering its strategy, they won't put that on the website. So you see the old strategy until the new strategy is being published. And if you don't know that, then it's very difficult to make a pitch. So it's important to invest in the relationship. So try to figure out with this donor who is the individual in this big organization often that can help me to get funding on the long term, or is the one that is going to make a decision. Try to connect with that person, build a relationship. If possible, meet face to face, because that really makes a huge difference, of course. At the moment, that's not possible. And sometimes if the donor is very far away, it's also very difficult. But you can still use Zoom or Skype or so as a second best option. And really try to listen first before you are going to talk to the donor. So, because if you know what they are telling you, you can adjust your story towards them, and based on that, you have a very better position to get them excited about working together with you. So, connect, make it personal, and listen first before trying to sell something to the donor, I would say.
Good, nice to hear. I also want to mention again that I haven't seen any questions in the chat, so please also feel free, if you have any questions coming up, to ask them to us or to Han, and we'll go to the next one now. You mentioned using buzzwords in a proposal. Mm-hmm. How do you know what buzzwords to use? So, Han, can you tell us a little bit like what the buzzwords, how do they work?
Yeah. So this question comes from the previous webinar that we organized on writing winning proposals. And I mentioned that indeed, if you write a proposal, it's very important to use buzzwords. And so buzzwords are words that trigger the donor to start liking you. And the next question is the question is very important. So how do you know which ones to use? It is very important to understand this donor and understand the language that the donor is using. In the webinar, I gave this example of this organization that tries to help civil society in southern countries by skills development on their lobby and advocacy kind of work. And it showed two examples of donors that are actually funding similar projects, where one uses the word lobby and advocacy, and the other one says, if you use the word lobby and advocacy, we cannot fund you. So it's important to listen to the donor, to see the wording that they are using and copying it. A very practical tool that I like to use is if you have a big policy document of sometimes 100 pages, just put it in a word cloud, and you will see what the keywords are of this donor. And you take the top 5 most often words, and you just repeat them. And the more you repeat them, the more excited the donor is going to be.
Okay,
Yeah.
we have a question from Nalin that's related to this. Like, how do you know what kind of a writing style donors prefer? So if that's more of a simple type of language or really development, jargon, complex language. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Also, that really depends on the donor. So it's again important to know the donor. And you can see already by if you read their strategy documents or their website, or you go on YouTube and you listen to how they speak in public about their work, for example, that you already get an idea of the wording they use, but also, for example, how they present themselves. If it's you have websites that are quite formal, or if you see someone doing keynote speech, you have people that are very formally dressed and people that are slightly more informally dressed. And if it's the latter, you can, of course, use a bit simpler language, perhaps, than if someone is dressed very formally. So there might be some small hints even. Another thing to consider is to see what the starting point of you submitting a proposal is. That's maybe a bit cryptical formulated, but if there is a tender procedure, for example, and the donor says we are looking for projects in a certain country, let's say somewhere in Asia, in India, we are looking for a project in India, and it should be on water and sanitation. If the call is that restricted, you can assume that the person that's going to evaluate your proposal knows quite a lot about water and sanitation and about the context in India. So there you can go a bit more formal and a bit more using more complex language and examples maybe. If the call is much broader, or it's a donor that funds many types of projects and is open to receive many proposals, like for example in the Netherlands, where I am from, we have the Nationale Postcode Lottery, the second largest private donor in the world after Bill Gates, and they are open to receive proposals on environment, on development cooperation, on education, on social inclusion, all kinds of topics. And there you have to know that the person that is evaluating your proposal is on the same day that he or she is evaluating your proposal, is evaluating multiple proposals on different topics. So that person, and they're great people working there, and they have a lot of knowledge, but they of course less in-depth. They have less in-depth knowledge than a donor that is specialized in one topic. So those are all kinds of indicators that help you to submit a proposal in the style that the donor is looking for. In case you have no clue, you might even want to reconsider submitting a proposal to the donor, simply for the reason that if you don't know the style of the donor, you don't know how they behave and what their attitude is, there's probably a lot more you don't know about the donor, and that is going to lower your chances on winning, of course. So it's you always have to have some basic knowledge of the donor, and probably you know enough to know the answer to this question.
So it's very, very donor specific, the language to use.
Yeah.
Thanks. I hope that answers your question. So we'll go to the next. So I've worked for over 10 years as an account manager for a company. My dream is to become a corporate fundraiser for a nonprofit. Any tips on how to approach this? So a shift in careers.
Yeah. And this is interesting. So this is, it's more to do with our third pillar of our organization, more on recruitment, maybe. But it's interesting. So I think that the reason why this person wants to become active in the nonprofit sector, and there might be two reasons at the moment why that is. It can be from the heart, or it can be very pragmatic. pragmatic. So many people lost their job at the moment, are losing the job at the moment because of COVID-19. But I assume that this person from the heart wants to go into the NGO sector and really wants to contribute to the greater good. So it's important to focus on the skills that you have, but also on your personal motivation on why you want to make this step. What we see with organizations, non-profit organizations that are looking for new staff members, often they go for the safe option. So someone they already know, or someone that has worked for also 10 years for a different NGO, for example. That is a bit safer than bringing in someone from the corporate side. And that lowers, of course, the chances of getting a job for this person. We also see NGOs that are saying, we would like someone that brings in a new behavior, a new attitude, a new view on how we should do things. We can become more efficient and we should connect with companies ourselves as well. So they say they are looking for someone with this profile, but still, if they have the possibility to choose between this person, 10 years of great experience, but outside of the sector, and someone from within the sector with less experience on corporate fundraising, I think the majority will actually go for the person with the experience in the non-profit sector, with less experience. So this person, I would recommend to focus on its visibility in the sector. Make sure that the sector knows that you exist. Maybe do some voluntary work, or maybe just before applying to a job, reach out to a few HR managers at different NGOs and ask them how they see this and how they would go about this. Maybe reach out to a few corporate fundraisers that are already working in the sector. Just ask them, what kind of skills do you really need? What kind of experience do you need? And then make the connection to yourself and say, hey, that's interesting because I already have that skills and experience and I would love to do this type of work. And well, there is one type of job that NGOs are still looking for and will keep on looking for in the future. Those are fundraisers. So I think if you focus on that, on your strengths, on your skills, on your reason, there's passion, there's heart into all of this, why this person wants to make this move. I think based on that, you can convince people to at least listen to you and maybe even hire you.
Good to know, some personal tips for a new job. So let's check the next question.
Exactly. Yeah, and this person can always register on our website. We have a link where you can register for doing some PR now, but where you can register for a job board. So every time one of our clients is posting a job, you will hear about it first. So
yeah, that's also very good to know.
Yeah.
Well, next question. We have looked at the US foundation market and have seen many possibilities. Should we target the larger and better known foundations, or is it better to start with the smaller ones first? So what would you do, Han?
Yeah, well, very interesting question, and nice to see so much variety in the types of questions. We go from COVID to recruitment to US foundation fundraising, so that is really cool. So should we target the larger, the obvious ones, or with the smaller ones first? Well, I think there is also a middle category, the enormous but not so known foundations in the US market. There are over 100,000 foundations active in the US, so there is a lot to choose from. And what you see is that most organizations that are targeting the US, without doing a lot of homework, they start with the 10 largest foundations. So the Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur, those types of foundations, Rockefeller, they hear about them a lot. They're easy if you do a Google search, US Foundation, and then you type in the topic of your organization. It's very likely that a few of those foundations will rank very high in your Google search. And that's because they're so enormous and they fund so many types of activities. So that makes sense. But they're also extremely difficult to get in for the simple reason that everyone that does it Google search will find these matches. So these larger foundations, they get so many applications, sometimes hundreds per week. And you're one of those many applications. So your success rate is not going to be extremely high unless you've worked on your reputation, your visibility, and they know that your application is coming. Then, of course, you're also a lot better. The smaller foundations are therefore a lot easier because a lot of people don't find them, and there are good databases on how to find them, and you have better opportunities there. But the problem with smaller foundations is that the possibility to grow your funding level with them is more limited. It's difficult to take a small foundation and maybe you can get $100,000 funding for a first project. But if you ask for $500,000 at a certain moment, they might not be able to fund you so much money. So it's there's a limit to it. But there is a missing middle here. There's still enormous and big foundations that can fund up to millions. But are a little bit more difficult to find. So that might be easier. I think for all organizations, the advice goes before you start submitting a proposal, assess very well if it's easy to see if your project might fit their policy, and often the answer is yes to the question. Does my project fit the Bill Gates Foundation? Well, very likely. But is the Bill Gates Foundation looking for your project? That's the question you need to ask yourself. And more often, you will get a no than a yes to that question. If you are not sure if it will be a yes, then probably you need to do your homework a bit better. And there are ways to do it. So especially in the US foundation market, US foundations publish their annual reports that they submit to the tax authorities. In jargon, they call it 990 forms. And in those forms, they explain what they have funded in the past. And what you can do if you're, for example, an organization active in the field of education, and you see a foundation that is funding projects in education, you could think there is a match. But education is an enormous. There's a lot of variety, of course, in the type of projects. Are you building schools? Are you working on the curriculum? Are you teaching teachers to do better teaching? But maybe you are an organization that supports to bring kids from the villages to schools, and you purchase a school bus for them, for example, to pick them up. Or even water and sanitation projects are part of this. So girls can go more easy to school because there are good water and sanitation facilities there. So if you go to those 990 forms, you can actually see what they funded in the past, and you can see, okay, this foundation is active in the field of education, but if they want to fund bricks or they want to fund policy kind of projects, that is what you can find out of these forms. And based on that, you can make a better decision. Is this going to be a good opportunity for us or not? It's a lot of work, but it will save you a lot of time and resources over the years.
Yeah, nice to hear. We have a few questions also from the participants, and I'll start with Leonard's one because it directly relates to this. How do you convince the donor to fund you? What are some strong points to put across if you don't have any past projects to reference? That also relates to your own report that you have, of course, on projects you've already been doing.
So if you don't have any past projects, it's very difficult, of course, to convince a donor of what you can do. They will have questions on your implementation capacity, and if it's new to you, they simply have to trust you. So I would invest in the personal relationship with the donor. I think for all new organizations, all startup organizations, you have one advantage. You are a startup organization. And many foundations and many institutional donors are looking for innovative projects, they say. So this is something you do per definition. And if you're competing with an organization that has existed already for 50 years, they might also submit a proposal in which they say, oh, look how innovative we are. But if you look at the past 50 years, you could see that the level of innovation might be lower than in your case. So that is already one advantage that you have. You're probably a bit faster, you're more flexible, you can adapt better to the conditions of the donor. So there are some advantages that you have. It's not going to convince all donors, I think. So maybe what you could consider for some donors is to work in partnership with other organizations that do have track records, and as a consortium submit a proposal. So an organization that finds it difficult to show their innovation, for example, they might be very interested in working together with you, and then together you can submit proposals. And they manage the grant, and you do some of the implementation, for example, meaning that you get a nice piece of the pie, and they also get a piece of the pie. Everyone is happy. So even that is possible, of course.
Yeah. So it's not impossible to start from new when you have your own advantages also.
No.
But it's not an easy.
No, maybe a stupid joke, but all NGOs that are extremely successful now have started one day. So you can be the success story, the next success story. Yeah.
Okay, and we had another question from Albert. You showed us a formula for the success rate of proposals approved versus submitted. Do you have any tips on how to evaluate the continuation of putting in proposals at donors?
I'm not really sure what Albert means.
Yeah, is that from another webinar?
Yeah, in the writing winning proposals, we were talking about this formula. Albert, can you maybe in the comments give elaborate a little bit more context on the question?
And then we could possibly start with another question.
Yeah, we come back to your question. Yeah, let's.
Albert, if you can elaborate a little bit more, we will continue with another question and come back to yours, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So let us know. What's the next question? How do you know which other organizations are developing proposals for a call we are developing a proposal for as well? So what is your competition? How do you know the competition?
Yeah, that is a very, very good point. Sometimes you don't know. That's that is the not so nice answer, but often you can figure it out. So first source of information is the donor itself, I would say. And before I go in answering the question, maybe good to zoom out a little bit so everyone understands the situation. So if you submit a proposal, you're writing a proposal, you are often one of many that is submitting a proposal. And therefore, it's very important to know who else is going to submit, because we need to know where they might be stronger than we are and where we are stronger than they are. Right? So if we know that we are very strong compared to a competition on a certain topic, we're going to address that more in our proposal. And if we know that we are weak on something else compared to others, we, of course, are not going to mention that too much in our proposal, and we're going to hide that a bit. And maybe in some cases you even want to partner with organizations that that you're competing with. So it's important to know who else is exploring these opportunities. So again, it depends on the goal, but one thing you could do is ask your donor. If it's a tender procedure, a donor is not allowed to give a lot of information, but off the record, sometimes you can get some information about this. So that is one. And another thing is it's good to look at the call to see if it's a new call, so it's a new focus area for a donor, or it's a continuation of a previous funding scheme that they had. If it's, of course, a continuation of a previous funding scheme, it's important to just look at who has been funded in the past, because it's very likely that at least those organizations are going to submit again. And maybe you can even ask the donor who else submitted, and sometimes they will tell you as well. And so you can form a good picture of all of that. If you know it's a continuation of a previous funding scheme, you have to assess, is this funding scheme, the new one, really different compared to the first one, or is it more of the same? If it's more of the same, it's important to talk to people like Merel, M&E experts, because often what donors do is halfway during a implementation phase is organize a so-called midterm review. So halfway during the process, they send evaluators to the field to see how the project is actually performing. And based on that, a report is being written to the donor, and you can see if the donor is happy with the implementation or not happy. And often these reports are public, or you can find the conclusions at least, often by just searching or asking around. And based on that, you can see how likely it is that you can submit a winning proposal. Sometimes you just don't know if it's, for example, what you sometimes see with larger USAID calls. You have to submit the CVs in your proposal of the people that are actually going to implement your project. So they call it the chief of party, the leader of the project. And before they can add a CV to a proposal, they need to have someone that is willing to do the job. So they advertise for it. So you can just look at online or in local newsletters, for example, newspapers. You can see, are they advertising for this call? Because if organization X is advertising for a chief of party, then probably they want to submit as well. Sometimes you have no clue who is going to submit a proposal, but at least you can know if it's going to be a lot of organizations that are interested in the topic or not so many. And it has to do with the broadness of the call. So the broader it is, the more organizations are tempted to submit a proposal, of course. But also on the topic, it can be a very specific kind of topic. But if there are not a lot of donors in the world interested in funding that type of project, even if it's a very isolated project that the donor wants to fund, you can still expect a lot of competition. And that's just knowing the field where you're active in, and and just listen very well on what is happening. Talk to your colleague organizations a lot, go to networking events. You know if it's a lot or not so much. So not always who, but at least if it's a lot or not.
Yeah, good to know who's the competition, or maybe even a possibility to work together on a proposal. Albert wrote a bit of clarification. So he said the success rate in financial terms in the formula is a way to decide to continue as an NGO to put in applications to foundations. That is often based on input-output, and whether there are other ways to evaluate to continue those types of fundraising proposals. I hope, Albert, that is what you'd like to know.
Yeah. No, that is, no, definitely. So it's not only financial reasons why you submit proposals or not. We actually have a webinar on how to make decisions in this, in the schedule that we show in a few minutes. You see the exact date. I think it's in 2 weeks to 3 weeks, if I am not mistaken. In that, we're going to we're going to discuss a tool that we developed to help organizations in making these decisions. We didn't come up with a catchy name, so we just called it the Decision Matrix. And the Decision Matrix is a tool with 10 indicators, so 10 topics to look at as an organization, to estimate what your chances of winning can be and where your weak points are if you are going to continue to submit a proposal. And one thing, for example, that I just want to highlight here that is extremely important, fundraising, the goal of fundraising is not only to get funding for your project. It's a tool to be able to achieve your goals and ambitions as an organization. You want to be able to implement projects of which you think they have the best added value possible. So you have a dream, you develop a project, and based on that, you are going to seek for funding. But sometimes the donor, they have special conditions, requirements. You want to do the project in village A, and they only want to fund the project in village B. So if you just copy paste your project from village A to village B, there might be a completely different reality that has an impact on your implementation. So one of the things you should always consider as an organization, can we actually implement this project in the best way possible? Even if we win, even if we get all that money that we ask for, can we handle these projects and can we deliver the results that we are looking for? So we have a list of 10 indicators. We're going to discuss it in the Making the Right Decisions webinar that is going to be published or held soon. So yeah, maybe that is a good starting point. We share the tool with all the participants for free as well. So yeah, so you can start using it yourself.
Well, thank you. There's another question from Leonard. Are there some standards for, oh no, there were two ones. What is the best way to put together proposals as a consortium? Not an easy question. Yeah, so I'm not sure if there's one answer to it. And the question you can read in multiple ways. I'm not sure if I will try to answer it in different ways, hoping that I answer it in the way you intended it as well. Question is, why do you want to work in a consortium? That will be my overarching question. There might be a reason that you want to work in a consortium simply because it higher your chances on getting funding. Like some donors, they insist that you submit proposals in a consortium. So you might not even want to work in a consortium, but if you don't work in a consortium, you are not going to win. So why not form a consortium then? And those consortia are not formed on a shared vision per se, but it's very practical, it's very pragmatic. We want to get the funding. And or I sometimes call them staple consortia. So organization A wants to do certain activities, organization B wants to do different activities. We put that together, we staple it, and we submit it to the donor, and we say we are a consortium. We're not actually working together. So it's if that happens, you could do it. I'm not a fan of these consortia, but yeah, it happens a lot, and it can be a very pragmatic solution. So, okay. In that, you don't need to collaborate so much together, and that's a bridge to how you can also read this this question. How do we actually co-design a proposal or co-develop a proposal? And in that, you have like two ways on how you can do it. So there are situations where there is a clear prime organization and some sub organizations. So a prime organization is the leading entity of a consortia, and they are legally responsible for everything that is happening. So they will be very directive in what they need from you, and they will just tell you if you are a sub, if you're part of the consortia but not leading it, you just implement one of the parts of the project. They will just tell you what they need and when they need it, and you just follow their leads. You also have consortia, of course, that are more vision-based and like-minded organizations. They co-develop a proposal. They do fundraising collectively as well. It's almost like a new collective project that they've developed, almost like a new organization. If that happens, it's very important to bring all the stakeholders in one room where possible, and spend a lot of time in developing the proposal. So you can imagine these types of workshops that take place. Many people in a room, a lot of post-its, and based on that, you develop the whole proposal.
and you divide the tasks and the planning, who does what, and how do we report to each other. You need like a steering committee or something like that that makes decisions when needed, and based on that you can make it work.
Okay, cool. One last question, I think, and then almost coming to an end. So also from Leonard, are there some standards for split of activity costs versus overhead administration costs, if that has not been provided by the donor? So if there's a standard format to use, that is more of a in-depth practical question.
Yeah, that's really a finance question. No, there is no standard for it. Overhead and your admin costs as an organization, so all the activities that are not funded, that are not connected directly to the project that you're asking funding for, that is overhead and admin cost, your internal cost. They are difficult to get funding from. That is definitely true. Some donors even say that all of the funding needs to go to the project, so none of it can go to overhead or admin. Others will give you a ceiling, or they allow you to share your way of calculating it, like USAID, for example. They with them you can share your formulas on how you calculate your indirect cost rates, and they will accept that or not. You negotiate that with them. Sometimes donors don't have these requirements for especially smaller foundations. For example, they might not even think about it so much. They just want to fund projects, and so it's important to discuss this with them prior to submitting a proposal. We've seen organizations that were rejected because they put in the budget 5% unforeseen. And of course, if you work on a project that is multiple years, your budget will never be implemented exactly the way you thought of it 5 years ago. You know, things happen, and some things turn out to be slightly more expensive and others not. But unforeseen, if you did not agree with the donor to put it in the budget, they might see that as a tool for you to even make some profit, or they just don't know what is happening with the funding. And the same goes for overhead. So I would always discuss this with the donor. Don't try to trick them. Sometimes you also see that when they take, for example, staffing costs, and they say, okay, our staffing costs are 60 euros per hour or so, but we also have some other admin costs and overhead. You know what? We are going to put 75 in the budget. So we make for every hour someone works on a project 15 euros to pay all of that. Your accountant is never going to approve that because you're not clear about your cost structure. So you will never get a stamp from the accountant. Your donor will be not happy. I was thinking about another word, but this will be published, so let's be polite. They will not be happy, so it's going to ruin your reputation. So check it up front. And this might also be coming back to Albert's question on how you make a decision on to submit a proposal or not. This is important because if your organization still needs funding for overhead and admin, and the donor is not willing to fund that, this is probably not the right donor for you to target. So you might want to target another donor instead.
Thank you very much, Han. I think we're almost coming to an end of our questions. Don't forget that you can always send your questions to us. So if you still have questions afterwards, don't hesitate to contact us. We still have a few webinars coming up. Here you can find an overview of the webinars that are still planned and scheduled. One next week on Wednesday about negotiations with partners and donors. That one will be very important, and maybe Han can tell a little bit more about it.
Yeah, we're very excited about this one, and it's actually twice in the schedule because yeah, it's we expect this one to be sold out very soon. So that's why we scheduled another one. Now this is a very exciting one. It's co-hosted with Stefan Spacey, and Stefan is he's an associate partner at Routslaven, and he's the founder of Negotiation and Public Service. These companies are very well known internationally for the negotiation work with companies, with NGOs, with governments as well. So he brings in a lot of experience from that field. Stefan himself has worked as a diplomat in the Middle East and has been working as a CEO for an organization, international NGO, also in the Middle East. So he brings in all that expertise. So I'm very excited that he is willing to share some of his lessons in this webinar. Yeah, so I very much recommend you all to join that webinar as well.
Yeah, and you will also, when you exit this webinar, there will be a pop-up link where you can already register.
Yes,
so
correct.
You
Yeah.
are interested in that. Did it webinar meet your expectations? We are very curious to see what you found of it, whether it meets your expectations. Do we answer questions you really have, or you still have other ones? We would also really like to improve these webinars. So after this webinar, when you exit it, you will get an evaluation form. So it would be great if you could fill that in for us and help us improve on these webinars for you. Yeah, Han, am I forgetting something? I think.
Yeah, one thing. So indeed, you will get a pop-up screen when you exit this webinar, where you will find the evaluation form and the schedule of the webinars. But also something that our colleague Mike shared with the participants of the Writing Winning Proposals webinar of last week. There is a possibility to share a text that you, or part of a proposal that you've worked on with us. And we will look at it from a writing point of view, from a technical point of view, and give you some feedback on how you can improve your writing of your proposals. It's for free, so yeah, don't hesitate to spam us with some parts of proposals. Please don't send us the whole proposal, but just 1 or 2 pages of your proposal, so we can give you some proper feedback on the style.
Nice. Well, thank you very much, Han, and thank you all for participating. We hope to see you again in any of our next webinars.
Yeah, thank you everyone for participating. If you have any questions, then send me an email at han@hanwalk.nl, and we will come back to you, and hope to see you in one of our upcoming webinars as well. So from Gouda, bye-bye. Oh, here you are. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye from the Netherlands. Bye-bye.
Bye.